I've got Alexi from Build on Bitcoin. Give us a brief intro in terms of your history and what brings you to this exact moment in time.
So for me, it started in 2015. And what really got me excited was Namecoin as a way to decentralize and improve censorship resistance of the internet. And
What does Bitcoin DeFi mean to you?
DeFi essentially means using Bitcoin in financial instruments, financial products, and of course, payments, being able to send money to someone, that's the basis. DeFi ultimately is just payments with extra conditions. And
Blockmates Orange is sponsored by Core Network, the ultimate Bitcoin-powered EVM-compatible blockchain. Learn more about Core at blockmates.com.
Welcome back, everyone. Another episode of a Blockmates Orange. I've got Alexi from Build on Bitcoin, but I kind of like rephrased it to build everything on Bitcoin. It seems to be the case after having done a bit of research on what Alexi and them are doing. Alexi, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you. You've pretty much spent a tremendous amount of time in crypto and obviously building what you guys are doing. Give us a brief intro in terms of your history and what brings you to this exact moment in time.
cool. Thanks for having me. I got started on Bitcoin through research. So I'm one of those people who, wrote a lot of papers and spent a lot of time looking at the theory of things. Myself and my co-founder, Dom, we consider ourselves recovering academics because we started in academia. We did a bunch of research and that's where we met. But then we always wanted to actually build things. The one thing that always bothered us in academia is, you do so much work, you write a paper, it gets accepted at a conference. Like people are like, okay, this is a good idea, this could work, and then you stop. Like where the actual interesting part begins. So for me, it started in 2015. I started looking into Bitcoin and specifically Namecoin. It was for my bachelor's thesis, and I was basically quite interested in anything related to IT security. And kind of the person that was offering the topics for these bachelor's theses was like, okay, hey, I also offer Bitcoin as a research topic. It's definitely something interesting. You should look into it. And what really got me excited was not just the fact that you could pay people and use it for payments, but actually Namecoin as an alternative or as a way to decentralize and improve censorship resistance of the internet, right? So your website can't be censored. You don't have to ask someone, oh, can I register this domain? It's just basically decentralize that and allow people to access this freely. And so that kind of took me on this random walk over a couple of years of like different research topics, starting from decentralized DNS to things like merge mining, where Namecoin inherited security from Bitcoin, which was very interesting. The first time ever that two chains were connected in some form. The first case of blockchain interoperability, and then that kind of led me into this area of, okay, how can we use Bitcoin for more than just payments? Can we do DeFi with it? How do we do that on Bitcoin, which ultimately resulted in us looking at interoperability and sidechains and bridges, because Bitcoin doesn't change. Bitcoin is not meant to have smart contracts. And so we started looking at, okay, how do we bridge Bitcoin to other chains? How could these other chains have a consensus or like a security system that is inherited from Bitcoin? So essentially a Bitcoin user doesn't have to learn about all these other protocols and really can just confidently use a Bitcoin. And what's been the main driver for us to create Bob and essentially work on these things for so long is that Bitcoin is the first digital asset. It's the biggest one. It started this entire movement, and it came out of a financial crisis. But today, if you want to use Bitcoin for anything other than payments, you kind of have to go to a centralized provider, which is quite controversial. Whereas Ethereum, Solana, right, you can use the native asset in DeFi. You don't have to trust anyone. And I think that is something that Bitcoin has struggled with. And with these new technologies that we're developing, we finally have a blueprint to build a system that has Bitcoin security, that allows you to use Bitcoin in DeFi. And this, so we hope to, get people off exchanges and just attract also more of the conservative Bitcoin user base that is just cautious of giving their Bitcoin to somebody else, but they still want to use it. I mean, there's a lot of money in there. People have their wealth sitting there and they can't do much with it without opening themselves up to a lot of risk. And that's why we're building Bob. And that's kind of, that's what led us essentially down this path. And I think the one thing to add here that will be, I guess, relevant for the rest of this podcast is that I come from the Bitcoin world, but my co-founder Dom comes from the Ethereum world, actually. So in the team, we have these two views, and we try to combine them to get the best of both worlds.
Just a quick word from today's sponsors, CoreX. CoreX is a decentralized exchange that integrates innovative social features and artificial intelligence, breaking the status quo of what trading looks like on a typical DEX. CoreX transforms trading, which is often solitary, into a vibrant, community-driven experience. It allows traders to connect, share insights, and collaborate. CoreX's AI capabilities serve as intelligent advisors providing real-time analytics, trend predictions, and personalized trading signals. Built on the core chain, CoreX emphasizes a commitment to Bitcoin alignment, decentralization, and security while simultaneously unlocking Bitcoin's much-needed utility. Visit corex.network and start trading now. I mean, you've basically presented us probably 3 to 4 hours of discussion, so let's see if we can get through this, in a way that obviously introduces you guys to the Blockmates community and what you're doing, but more importantly, to convey the message of the importance of Bitcoin as an asset that can be programmable. Because at the moment, we know that it's something that a few ecosystems are doing, but it's not being kind of like widely recognized. And I think the obvious question to ask is, what does Bitcoin DeFi mean to you, and what Bob is doing kind of in the greater context, and maybe the good message that Bitcoin has to offer the world?
I mean, DeFi essentially means using Bitcoin in financial instruments, financial products. And of course, payments for me also count as DeFi, but usually that's the basis, right? Being able to send money to someone, that's the basis. But what is DeFi? I mean, DeFi ultimately is just payments with extra conditions, right? You had some conditions where I'm trading, I'll give you this Bitcoin if you give me stable coins, or I'll borrow your stable coins against a Bitcoin. If I don't repay you, you're going to get the Bitcoin. And then you build all these products. So they're ultimately conditional ways to do payments, if you really want to kind of simplify that. So for us, Bitcoin DeFi means being able to use Bitcoin as the asset to trade, buy other assets, borrow against it, mint Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, create structured products, earn yield, right? Get more Bitcoin, deploy it in ways where you use it in financial products that allow you to earn more BTC. With, of course, there's always risks associated with that. But the goal of doing this in DeFi is the D at the start, decentralized. That means that we don't want to trust other providers. We don't want to be forced to go back to centralized exchanges or to centralized entities, which ultimately have shown over and over again that they're part of the old financial system. And as much as centralized providers have pushed the DeFi ecosystem forward, there's the risk is the whole point of Bitcoin is that you can trust technology. Like, you trust that the tech works. And the longer the tech exists, the bigger the community, the more users, the more people have looked at it, the more secure it becomes. So the technical risk of these things decreases over time. Whereas with centralized systems, you don't know, right? It could decrease over time because there's good management and people are doing a good job. But with FTX, we've seen, it looked great from the outside, and suddenly, boom, turns out it was a massive fraud, and you just don't know as an outsider. And so for us, the vision is twofold. It's not just about tech. So the first point, of course, is how do we create a system that inherits security from Bitcoin so we can minimize the additional trust assumptions that you have to make as a Bitcoin holder, and then allow you to deposit Bitcoin into that system in a way that you can always get it back. Specifically, this bridging part, this depositing part, is the one that is so difficult to solve. And bridges are very hard to build. And at the end of the day, whether you're putting Bitcoin into a centralized exchange, into something like Cash App, or in depositing it onto Ethereum or an L2 or a sidechain, you're always giving away custody. That's just how it works. There is no way for you to wrap Bitcoin, use Bitcoin in other systems without giving away custody. That's if you have your keys, how are you going to trade against me? How are you going to use that as collateral to borrow my assets? Like, if I can never get access to your coins no matter what, that doesn't work in finance. So you have to take some risk on. And the goal that we have is minimize that risk. So yes, your risk is if the financial product, like if you go over leveraged, if you over speculate, okay, That is a risk of the product, but you should not face the risk of your assets being stolen. And that's ultimately the problem at the heart of depositing Bitcoin or bridging it into other systems. Someone has to enforce that when you lock up your Bitcoin, you get, Bitcoin on the platform, whether it's Bitcoin on the exchange or wrap Bitcoin on a sidechain or a layer 2 or an Ethereum. And ultimately, when you want to withdraw it, be it yourself or the person who you transferred it to, they need to get it out. And that is the one big problem that has been unsolved, right? And today, the way these systems work is that you have a multi-sig. So you have a few people that together say, okay, we're going to not misbehave. We're going to keep your assets safe. And as long as the majority of us, so 3 out of 5, for example, are honest, your assets are safe, which is an okay assumption. But ultimately, you're trusting a group of people that could collude and steal your funds, or they could lose their keys or get hacked, right? It's not necessarily that they want to steal. They just could get targeted by a hacker and mismanage their keys. So that's one point, like solving the problem of taking Bitcoin and putting it into a system, a platform that allows you to use it for more than just payments, right? So think of like, okay, decentralizing a centralized exchange, have all these services, but you can always get your Bitcoin out. And at the same time, and that's the second kind of vertical here, is making sure that that process is actually easy and straightforward and accessible to users that are not technical experts. Because today, the majority of these solutions, even with centralized providers, right? If you want to wrap your Bitcoin to other chains, it usually involves different websites, different interfaces. You have to click many times. You have to make sure you know which wallets are supported. In some cases, there's a minimum deposit amount. In others, you need KYC. So there is a lot of there are many hurdles and a lot of drop-off points for users when they, for the first time, want to use Bitcoin and DeFi, right? They just want to and if you compare it to the experience for the centralized exchange, which in all fairness isn't that great either, right? I mean, we all know that feeling once you've sent the Bitcoin and you're just waiting on Binance or whatever for your deposit to show up, and then it takes longer, and you're like, what the hell is going on? Is my money gone? So we all know that feeling, but that's still so much better than the experience you have today in these like multi-sig solution that allow you then to use these things in DeFi products, but they're still kind of semi-centralized. And so the goal is create a user experience where you just don't have to worry. Like you have a nice interface, you can log in with your socials, you don't necessarily have to deal with private keys if you don't want to, and then you can one click deploy your Bitcoin into whatever you like, whether it is just selling it, one Bitcoin transaction, and you've got your stable coins or whatever, you've been able to cash it out into your bank account and streamlining that, or you want to borrow stable coins, or if you want to actually go and use some DeFi products to earn yield, and you're actually you want to speculate on the Bitcoin price and you're leveraging up, do that in one transaction. Don't go clicking around and figuring out all these different solutions. And that's essentially the 2 pillars, right? Making it more secure and more accessible at the same time, so that we can onboard the 300 million plus Bitcoin holders onto DeFi and essentially make it look and feel like it's a normal bank, like it's a normal Web2 application, but that they know that it's actually secure and their assets are safe. And I think if we can do that, then that's when we win. I don't think I can hear you,
I
unfortunately.
think the biggest challenge here is obviously Bitcoin holders generally don't like to go beyond holding their Bitcoin. And I think, obviously this is something that you guys have, I'm sure, have grappled with in terms of the psychology behind it and, the hodl culture. I believe that this is the biggest challenge, is to obviously convince people that, first of all, it's a good idea to do this kind of DeFi stuff. What is the kind of like the approach that you guys have taken around that from a user-centric perspective?
Well, I mean, I think it's very important to give users choice. Someone who has their Bitcoin in a cold storage wallet and just wants to keep them as a fallback, as a protection against hyperinflation, they don't have to use it in DeFi, right? You don't have to, right? So the people who we're targeting are people who are already using Bitcoin, but they're using it on centralized exchanges, centralized providers. It's the people who lost their money with Celsius, with Voyager. I mean, all these other examples where you were trusting a platform that just essentially misappropriated your funds. And I honestly think that we need to try, like, our goal is to present opportunities and educate people about, here's what you can do, and here are the risks that are associated, and you should make your own decision whether you want or you do not want to use your Bitcoin. Because I honestly feel that the worst thing we could do is go to people and say, oh, you have to put your Bitcoin in DeFi and you're going to make so much. No, that's not what we're trying to do here. Bitcoiners are rightfully cautious, and many people buy Bitcoin because they see it as a safe asset. But then again, there is a lot of demand for them using this asset. And I do think that there's a bright future for DeFi, because look, at the end of the day, why was Bitcoin created? Because it kind of came out of a financial crisis that was caused by, well, essentially fraud and lack of transparency and people not knowing what was going on. And basically these complex structures where it's just very hard even for an auditor to understand what's going on. And like DeFi counters this with, it's all on chain, it's transparent. Like you can clearly see, is this position backed by real assets? And is it over collateralized? And of course, when you add in stable coins, you're kind of bringing in a bit of that, TradFi trust into the system. And I think, I don't expect people and I know many Bitcoiners expect hyper Bitcoinization to happen within like a short period of time where everything switches to Bitcoin. That's not what we expect to happen. What we want to build is an alternative. If you don't want to use centralized services, you should be able to do that in the decentralized manner. And then you can decide what risk you want to kind of accept. And of course, you made a very good point of like, okay, how do we balance security and understanding of the risks with good UX? Lightning, for example, has failed in that regard. It is very complicated to use. And ultimately, yes, you could run your own Lightning node. You could look at all the transactions. You could always track, like, when do I post which revocation transaction, like what's going on. But the majority of users, if you look at Lightning, like 90% or whatever, I don't remember if it was always between 70 to 90 of the Lightning traffic was done from custodial wallets that just offer you a neobank-like experience at the cost of security. So I honestly think it's about finding the right balance. If you want to dig deeper, if you want to run it yourself, you should be able to, and that's what you will be able to do with the things that we're building, specifically things like BitVM, where we create trust minimized bridges for Bitcoin for the first time. But if you don't want to deal with it, then you can, of course, just go and use the same nice interface. And what you're doing is you're putting trust in this community, in this open source community of people that are operating this, that are maintaining this, that have looked at this. Because let's be honest, how many people know how Bitcoin actually works under the hood? How many people know how these wallets work? Like, there's always some level of trust. And hence we say trust is perceived. And the goal that we have is to, convince enough people to look at this, to use it, that understand the tech, and that can then essentially vouch for, okay, this is actually secure. Like, there's no backdoors in it. It's doing what it should do. And that allows other people who maybe understand how it works but can't read the code to then try it out. And essentially you grow this net of trust of people who put trust into a system. Whereas it's very hard to do that for a centralized provider, because ultimately, people do that, right? But then essentially, if you never have access to transparent documents, proof of reserves, how are you ever going? This kind of net of trust is built on assumptions. Whereas with tech, it's built on cold hard facts. Like, here's the code. Here's the code we're running. You can check it if you want to. You can pay an auditor to go look at it, like, even if you don't know how to code yourself. And I think it's going to be a long journey, obviously, if we want to onboard hundreds of millions of people from Bitcoin into DeFi. But again, the population of Bitcoin holders is growing very fast. So, and especially I know there was like this resistance of using other systems among a very early and small group of, to be fair, Bitcoin maximalists. That is no longer the case. Like, very few people are actually worried about using other chains. Look at Solana and Ethereum. They're leading the charge with onboarding retail, and Bitcoin is falling behind it. That's what we're trying to solve here. We're trying to allow users to stay within the Bitcoin ecosystem, because realistically speaking, 90% plus of people hold Bitcoin that have crypto. And if you look at the traditional media, what do they talk about? when the price goes up, the price goes down, something happens. It's Bitcoin. Just people know Bitcoin. Bitcoin has reached cult status. It's mainstream. I mean, the banks who were always attacking Bitcoin are now selling it to my grandma via ETFs. I mean, we're in a different state now, and that is something that nothing else has. So there's always reason to try to build these things for Bitcoin, because that is our safest and most reliable path of building secure and transparent financial products, or building a system that can act as an alternative, right? For you and me, right? Hopefully we've never had the issue of getting debanked, of not being able to access our cash or go to the bank. But many people have that problem. And for the day that you get hit by that, you should have a way somewhere to go. And that's what we're trying to build.
So, I mean, you've presented another really interesting thing, and it's something that's quite specific about what you guys are building, is a hybrid design around kind of like the DeFi model in the way that I perceive it. But I want to, before we get into the detail of that, there's been an ongoing discussion, debate, call it what you like, between the idea of a true L2, something that actually does settle on top of Bitcoin, versus the idea of a sidechain. Can you, from an academic perspective, just give us kind of like a difference between what a sidechain is and what an L2 is? I do understand that the Lightning Network is recognized as being probably the single truest L2 at the moment, based on kind of like the complexity of bridging between obviously the layer one, which is Bitcoin, and layer twos versus sidechains. I'll give you the opportunity to kind of comment around that. But for me, that's the most interesting part about this kind of like the Bitcoin DeFi and the dynamic between sidechains and L2s. And then the last part of this is obviously looking at kind of like this hybrid design, and obviously your PhD and bridging and the rest of it comes into it. So a big story to tell there. So I'll just give you the opportunity to kind of break it down for us.
Sure, absolutely. So you made a very good point there, right? I mean, what is a true L2? And I think, it's very, very important to always state what works today and what doesn't work today, but might work in the future. And I think, in our industry, these lines often get very blurry, especially people marketing. And you have to promote the future, but sometimes people go overboard and just promise you, the Holy Grail. And the thing about a Holy Grail, in some cases, it's really the Holy Grail because you can never reach it. Now, the good news is that Bitcoin secure networks that have trust minimized bridges are not the Holy Grail anymore, because we can actually build this. We know how to do it. But if we zoom out and talk about what's the difference between a sidechain and L2s, I mean, I think both of these words have been used and abused, I guess, as umbrella terms to describe the same thing, right? I'm a big fan of a website called Bitcoin Layers. It's bitcoinlayers.org, and we've been working with them and trying to actually classify the state of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And they make a very interesting distinction between Bitcoin native networks, side systems, and then alternatives. Because think of it this way, right? What do you consider a roll-up on Ethereum, right? An L2 on Ethereum, the definition is pretty clear. You have to inherit security and you have to have a native bridge. So I can deposit my ETH and I can always get it out as long as, and then that's where, as long as, and then there's this ... thing. And then how does this actually work? And then you open up the discussion to, well, is it an optimistic system where, we say that we're doing things correctly, and then there's 7 days for people to challenge us, or it's a validity roll-up that uses ZK proofs to prove each single time that everything was done correctly. But then there is even distinctions there where, where are we posting the data that you need to verify what was going on? And then you have optimiums and validiums and, buzzwords, and the new user is like, what the hell is going on? Like, I struggle to follow sometimes with these new nomenclatures. And we have the same case in Bitcoin. I'm honestly just a big fan of, calling things what they are. We have today, the only system that arguably is a real L2 is Lightning. And why? Because Lightning uses Bitcoin transactions off-chain. It just takes literally your normal Bitcoin transaction. You run it, if you and I open a Lightning channel, we're doing the same thing we'll be doing on the chain, on Bitcoin. But instead of publishing every transaction, we go back and forth, and then we just publish the final transaction, which says, there is like 2 Bitcoin on this side, 5 Bitcoin on this side, done. We've settled our debts and whatever. And that makes Lightning today the only real layer 2 network on Bitcoin, but not just on Bitcoin, everywhere, right? It's just the only one. Now, why is this the case? Because Lightning only does payments, right? And that, of course, is easier to do because literally you're just taking transactions off chain and you're doing everything you could do on Bitcoin, but you're doing it in a smarter way that you don't have to publish everything. But then, is that enough, right? I mean, is that the layer 2? I would say no, right? That's not quite what we want to achieve. Payments are not enough, and yes, we can do payments on Bitcoin, and it's great, but people don't want to pay with Bitcoin. We've seen that people want stablecoins. They want to borrow, they want to lend, they want to trade. And if we want to actually add functionality to Bitcoin, that's where it gets tricky, because you can't build something as an L2 that is in the way that Lightning is done, that supports DEXs, lending, and so on, because, well, Bitcoin L1, the scripting language, does not support that in a way that you could publish it. So what we then have to resort to is we have to resort to executing more complex things off chain and then proving without publishing the entire data in the worst case. Because Lightning, in the worst case, you just broadcast, right? Yeah. You just can't do this with these more advanced systems that allow you to trade, lend, mint meme coins, and like mint NFTs, and like create RWAs, and all of these things require a bit more complexity. And so now we're left with the question: okay, well, how do we actually build a real L2? And at the end of the day, the ideal scenario, right? And we're kind of starting with the potentially holy grail without a fork. So if we get a fork, we can do this. Without a fork, doesn't work. And the holy grail is, okay, we would take whatever we have off chain. And this could be another chain, another blockchain that has the Ethereum virtual machine, the Solana virtual machine, some other virtual machine with another programming language, doesn't matter. We run it. We run this blockchain. We have these blocks that are created. And for each block, or for each batch of blocks, we create a proof that every single transaction was done in adherence with the rules of the system. So you don't have double spending, you're not minting coins out of thin air, you're not sending coins around that don't belong to you, right? So very simple. But you compress that into a proof. And that's what ZK proofs like Starks and Snarks allow us to do. They allow us to compress these things into quite efficient proof systems where you have to only verify the proof. Now, this works on Ethereum, right? You have ZK rollups or validity rollups on Ethereum that essentially do that. You run the entire thing off chain. Somebody's running it into either one or multiple sequencers that collect transactions, build blocks, and then they post these proofs. And they prove to you that, look, I did everything according to the rules. I did not cheat. And Ethereum, the smart contract on Ethereum, there is something that actually then checks this. And every Ethereum full node is aware that, hey, this layer 2 has done everything correctly. Now, in Bitcoin, the problem is that, well, we could do that, right? We could actually implement a snark verifier in Bitcoin script. In fact, we've done that. Like, this exists. This is what's also in like the BitVM teams have been working on. The problem is that it just is way too big to fit into a Bitcoin block, right? And that's just due to the fact that, yes, we can build many things with Bitcoin script, but it's just so inefficient. It's such a limited programming language. You have to write your own multiplications, right? When you're multiplying on Ethereum to numbers, you just say A multiplied by B, done. You don't think about it. In Bitcoin, you have to build that yourself, right? An analogy that oversimplifies this, and it's not quite how it works, but think of it as this way. On Bitcoin, you kind of have to add these numbers manually, which is just very stupid, right? But we don't have the tools we need. So either we get a fork, and that's where the whole debate about OP-cat and covenants on Bitcoin and like adding new functionality comes from, right? If we add a few of these things, we can build these ZK verifiers in a way that fits into a transaction. And then we could actually create a solution that really verifies everything that happens off chain in a way that every Bitcoin full node would know that, oh, Alexi is layer 2 based on the rules that were pre-agreed on chain, right? I tell people this is what this thing is going to do. Maybe it only does trading. And, we have the rules of, okay, if you were trading, you're going to get the assets. And, if you send me money, I'm going to send you money back, and all of these kind of things. We're not printing money out of thin air. And then everybody can check that, yes, these rules have been kept and everything is fine. Now, but we don't have that. That just doesn't work yet because we are not able to efficiently encode these ZK proofs into Bitcoin script. That just doesn't work without a fork. So we're left with optimistic rollups. And optimistic rollups differ from this validity of rollups that use ZK proofs for every single state. In an optimistic rollup, we essentially say, look, we're going to execute something off chain. I'm going to commit to what I'm supposed to run. You can verify what I did on your local computer. And if I cheated, you only publish a very small piece of that whole computation, specifically the part where I was cheating. And then, of course, we need to construct these things in a way that allows you to basically say, oh, look, example of a multiplication, right? I'm claiming 2 times 10 is 19, which is obviously wrong. You'll run this on your local machine. You'll run the same program because you know exactly what I should be running, which program. And you'll see that, oh, at like step 5, instead of adding 2, I'm adding 1, right? So obviously now the computation is wrong. And what you do is you'd go to Bitcoin and say, well, wait a second. Alexa, you're cheating, and here is exactly where you're cheating. And you actually execute this cheating, this part where you're showing where I'm cheating on Bitcoin. So now every phone node on Bitcoin sees, okay, Alexei committed, he promised to run this program, which is a multiplication. And now someone else has shown that in step 5, Alexei actually did something else. But I've kind of, I think, diverged a bit from your original question of like, okay, what's a real L2 and what's a sidechain? Well, these would be real L2s under my definition, or the definition of Ethereum as we know them today, because in this case, we're running computations off chain. And then, yes, you need someone to do these challenges, but it could be anyone, right? Anyone in the Bitcoin network, even like be it me as a retail user who is making the transaction and who could be defrauded, or is a professional operators or full nodes, doesn't matter. Anyone could go and say, wait a second, this is wrong. And that makes it very secure, and that gives us the chance to enforce that the entirety of Bitcoin is aware that, you know, things are happening correctly on the layer 2. So we're inheriting Bitcoin security. And then using these techniques, we can also, what do we really care about? We care about, you know, the Bitcoin that are deposited, are they withdrawn in a correct way? That's, of course, part of this kind of test that we're verifying there. So that will be, in my opinion, real Bitcoin layer 2s. Now, what can we do today? Today, none of this exists. However, optimistic rollups exist on testnet, or not quite, but we're getting there. With BitVM, which is a tool that allows us to create optimistic rollups on Bitcoin, we can actually achieve real Bitcoin layer 2s for the first time without a Bitcoin fork. And then there is, beyond that, there are many other side systems that inherit Bitcoin security in some form, or they use Bitcoin as a native asset, or they associate themselves with Bitcoin. And that's where it gets really, really, really blurry. And in my personal opinion, I'd make this kind of distinction between, okay, either every Bitcoin full node is verifying that your system is correct, whether we manage to, whether there's a Bitcoin fork in the future and we can actually execute these ZK proofs on Bitcoin L1, or we have these prop proofs where, okay, assuming that there's someone who will challenge, we can also enforce that it is secure on the Bitcoin L1. So every full node is aware. And then there is a category of Bitcoin secure networks, we could call them, where you have merge mining, for example, which is a technique where you allow Bitcoin miners to reuse their hash rate to secure your network. So they're mining on Bitcoin, and at the same time, they're mining your chain, and they include the commitment to what's going on your network into the Bitcoin blocks that they're mining. So they're anchoring it in, and they're saying, look, I have 10% of Bitcoin's hash rate as a pool, and I'm also going to deploy my hash rate onto your chain. That means that somebody now, if somebody wants to attack your chain, they need more than 5% of the hash rate, right? Because we have 10%. And the more of the hash rate that you can get to actually participate in merge mining, the more secure your network becomes to external attacks. You're still in practice at the mercy of the mining pools, because if not all the mining pools, like Bitcoin mining is decentralized enough, but if only a third or 2/3 of Bitcoin mining pools do merge mining, it becomes quite centralized on the layer 2. But still, that's a sidechain for me. So that's things that, or like a side system or a Bitcoin secured network, where we have Bitcoin security, and in this case, a subset of nodes. So specifically, the miners are verifying what's going on the layer 2, on the side system, right? And that means, okay, not every Bitcoin full node, but a subset. And it's much more difficult to attack this versus, where it's a centralized system. And something that's new is Bitcoin staking, which is a similar mechanism, but instead of using proof of work, you use Bitcoin that's locked up. So the way this works is anyone who has BTC can deposit Bitcoin into a lock, contract on the Bitcoin main chain, run the validator for the side system. And if you double signs, right? If you're trying to create a fork, if you double sign, so you said, okay, this is the main chain, but actually you're trying to attack and you're signing this other chain as well, that double signing using some cryptographic tricks reveals your Bitcoin private key. So now your Bitcoin that you locked is gone because anyone can spend it, right? The moment you reveal your private key, your Bitcoin or the miner is going to take it, right? And that creates a pretty strong security mechanism. And that is another way to create Bitcoin secured networks. So now you have these tools to inherit Bitcoin security. But what this doesn't give you is the trust minimized deposits, right? So you still have to figure out how to build a bridge. And that's again where BitVM comes in, this technique which we could use to create Bitcoin rollups. We can also use it to create a bridge for these Bitcoin secured system, where you don't have full Bitcoin security, but you have a subset of it, which is, to be fair, more secure than the 99% of the things that exist today on L1s and L2s. And then you still kind of have these trust minimized deposits where you don't need to trust a third party multisig provider or like BitGo or somebody else, but you only trust that, okay, the majority of hash rate or the majority of Bitcoin staked was honest. And then your bridge is only dependent on that. And that, in my opinion, that is a Bitcoin secure network. That's a sidechain or side system. And everything else that does not inherit Bitcoin security, that already goes into, okay, it's an affiliated system. It's trying to be affiliated with, like, it has, like, if we don't make the cutoff here, then you would consider Ethereum a Bitcoin sidechain, which it's not, right? Just because Ethereum has RapidEC doesn't make it a sidechain. And that's my personal view, but I think we're kind of aligning as an ecosystem on these definitions. Because it's also what you see on Ethereum, right? Like, and rollups and L2s were born on Ethereum. And I think it's important to also align with what people understand under these definitions. But again, if we zoom out, what the state of things today is, everything's called a Bitcoin L2 or whatever, or hybrid L2. And like, people just, say what they're aiming to build. And then you have to actually look at the docs and be like, okay, or you go to bitcoinlayers.org and you understand, okay, fair enough, these guys, and you have to talk about the vision, that's fair. And then you have to have a place where people who want to deploy Bitcoin can go and understand the risks of the current implementation.
Yeah, I was actually really fortunate to interview Red from Bitcoin Layers. And that was when I was first introduced to the idea. And that's why I asked the question. And thank you for a very eloquent answer and insightful answer. I mean, it is really interesting how there are trade-offs, there are advantages, there are disadvantages. And I find it fascinating from the perspective of the fact that we are obviously empowering Bitcoin to be programmable. And there's obviously various routes to kind of this I don't know what that point is, but yeah, we're going, I think, in a positive direction. And I just think it's great that there are different options, there are different ecosystems. I don't know which one is better. I don't know if there is such a thing as one thing is better than the other, but I'm very intrigued as to how you guys are now looking to obviously incorporate, as you termed it at the start of our interview, the hybrid design. So obviously an opportunity for you to kind of like not necessarily promote what it is that you guys are doing, but just to kind of like, yeah, I think you guys are doing something quite innovative, and it sounds like it's quite different and it's incorporating a lot of the above. So yeah, what does hybrid mean beyond just combining obviously L1, L2? Is it sidechains? Yeah, let us know.
So the hybrid design comes out of like a lot of the research and thinking about how do we not only build the tech, but also create a successful ecosystem. Because one lesson we learned, I've been doing this for 10 years on the research side, and the company is 5 years old. We've built bridges before. We've built the most secure Bitcoin bridge in production so far that uses over collateralization and is very secure, but very inefficient. So we've gone down the route of building the most secure tech. But the thing is, it's not enough, right? You need to create an ecosystem where projects, apps can go to build good products, go to market fast, and not struggle with everything left and right and limit non-existent infrastructure and like limited tools. And so when I think, I've kind of been pitching like Bitcoin Layer 2 is, I think that's the future of Bitcoin scaling and also usability in DeFi. But it's not just about tech. When you're building a Bitcoin layer 2, you have to solve 3 problems. The first one we discussed now at length is how do I inherit Bitcoin security and how do I have a trust minimized bridge? In my opinion, if we don't have this, then Bitcoin L2s don't have the right to exist. That's the basis. But that's not enough. We also have to, and that's step 2, create an ecosystem. You have to make sure that builders have the best in class tools, that when they choose where to deploy, they don't choose Ethereum every single time or Solana. No, they can choose Bitcoin L2s because you gave them the best tools, the good infrastructure. You gave them a way to focus on their own product and not struggle with, oh, can I write tests here? Do I have an Oracle? Do I have RPC nodes? Like, do I have an Explorer? Do I have a wallet? That has to be there for you to be able to work with these projects to build good products and let them focus on what they like. Let them use Bitcoin for scaling and growing and as a distinctive feature rather than struggling with, reinventing the wheel. And naturally, I mean, this has been, Bitcoin L2s have been tried before in different forms and sidechains. And there's a few sidechains that have been around for a long time. And I'm taking a stab here because I'd argue the reason why Bob exists and so many other Bitcoin L2s have, or contenders have emerged is because that market was not saturated, because nobody ever actually delivered a system that could compete with ETH L2s. And so what we've done is we've leveled the playing field and we've said, okay, well, why don't we use the EVM, specifically the OP stack, which is, in our opinion, the best stack to build apps with the best tools, and make sure that, okay, if you're building in this Bitcoin environment, there is no difference between building on Bob, which is what we're doing, and Base or Optimism. And that is in fact the case, right? So what we've done is, the UX and dev tooling of Bitcoin and Ethereum and L2s was up here, and Bitcoin was down there, right? So a huge gap, like Bitcoin just has no dev tooling. It's very, like, if you want to build this like a DEX, doesn't work. And what we've done is we said, okay, look, we're going to level the playing field. Now it's the same. You have the same tools, same infrastructure. You can use all the same things. And even existing top tier DeFi projects like Uniswap, Aave, Euler, and so on, they can go and deploy and then work on Bitcoin focused products and work with teams that specialize on onboarding Bitcoin, better UX, and so on. So that's part 2. You have to actually, make sure that builders could choose Bitcoin as an option without risking their entire business. And then the third kind of thing we need to achieve is liquidity. We need to get access to different assets, and we need to get access to stable coins, and we need to allow people to deposit and withdraw not only Bitcoin, because you need something to do with it, right? I mean, sure, we can always have it Bitcoin only and maybe Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, but that's not what people want. They want access to centralized stablecoins. They want access to USDT, USDC, PayPal USD. They want access to ETH, to Sol, to meme coins. They want access to other things that exist maybe on other platforms. And that's why you need to be connected not only to Bitcoin and not only build in isolation, but be part of this wider DeFi ecosystem, because network effects and access to centralized exchange liquidity and deposit withdrawals is important. And if you don't have stable coins, people can withdraw and deposit from into centralized exchanges. You don't have on and off ramps, you're dead in the water. And we've seen this done, right? There are examples of Bitcoin layer 2s that were like sidechains that built in isolation. They took the EVM, but they didn't do anything of the other stuff. And Ethereum just kept accelerating while, again, just having the EVM is not enough. So having said all this, like what Bob is, it's a hybrid. So what we do is we say, okay, Bob will inherit Bitcoin security. We're building a trust minimized bridge that allows you to deposit and withdraw Bitcoin in the most secure way that we can do today. That hasn't been ever done before. And we use the EVM because, pragmatically speaking, that is the best builder tooling for DeFi. If you want to build these things, that's what you have to go with. If you want to stand a chance of being able to compete with dominating platforms that like Base or Arbitrum or Optimism. And then 4, we're also connected to Ethereum. And that, I think, is the big distinguishing part. We're not just going after Bitcoin maxis. I don't think that's a big enough market. I don't think the group of Bitcoin only maxis is that big. In fact, we know that it's not. We know that you have hundreds of thousands, millions probably of Bitcoiners on Ethereum, Solana, and all the other chains. Why? Because they all have Bitcoin. Some of them are already using it in DeFi, right? Some already use DeFi. But Bitcoin is hard for them to use in DeFi because of lack of tooling, so they don't, but they would. And so what we do is we say, okay, Bob is inheriting Bitcoin security. We have the most secure way to use Bitcoin on Bob. And then what we do is we connect to Ethereum. Now, how do we do that? And like, it doesn't end with Ethereum, of course, but that's the first one because it's the biggest one. And what I'm talking about here is, of course, what we're building towards. And I can explain what's live today in the phases of rolling this out. But what we're building towards is that on Ethereum, to the ETH user, Bob would look like a layer 2. So you could, like, it would look the same as Arbitrum base. You could deposit your assets, you could withdraw them. And the only difference is when you're depositing into Arbitrum, what happens is that you're trusting that Ethereum is secure, because when you want to withdraw, right, you have to wait for a few days, and that basically is this challenge period for fraud proofs. So if there's a fraud proof on Ethereum, so the sequencer did something wrong, okay, then that's when kind of the disputes are happening and assets are protected. And with Bob, with our hybrid design, we say, well, instead of looking for fraud proofs on Ethereum, what we're going to do is we're going to modify the Ethereum L1 contract to look at Bitcoin, because that is where Bob is finalizing. If you look at Bitcoin, you can check that the Bob add block, let's say 10,000, has been verified and finalized and then you have Bitcoin staking and eventually these full rollups, right? As we discussed earlier today. But you know that this is verified and in some form hooked into Bitcoin. And then the Ethereum layer 1 contract, and that's the cool thing about this design, is like Ethereum can verify Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin is so simple, Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, Tron, all of these newer chains can easily run something called a light client. So it's the same thing that when you have your phone, you have a Bitcoin wallet, you don't download gigabytes of Bitcoin transactions. You download a few megabytes of the block headers, and then you just can accept proofs that, oh, that transaction at block 10 million or whatever in Bitcoin actually happened. That's exactly what we do. So we just verify from within Ethereum cryptographically that certain transactions happen in Bitcoin. And these are the transactions that prove to the Ethereum user that, yes, this is safe. And as a result, if you're depositing it into Bob as an ETH user, you will be trusting Bitcoin. And it's the same for Solana. We can connect this way to Solana as well, or to Ton, Sui, Aptos. Any chain that has smart contracts can run a Bitcoin light client. And the moment you can run a Bitcoin light client, you can connect to Bob. And the trick that we use here is twofold. On the one hand, we say, look, Bitcoin is super easy to verify. Everybody can build this. It already actually is in production on the majority of chains. There is something called the Bitcoin light client or a BTC relay that some projects are using. We have one on Bob, there's one on Ethereum, there's one on Avalanche. Like, this already exists for almost 8 years now, since 2016, when the first time implemented for the first time on Ethereum. Okay, simplicity makes it easy to verify. And the second part of this trick, I guess, that we apply is, as discussed, trust is perceived. And if there's one thing that Bitcoiners, Solana users, ETH maxis, Sui, Aptos users, doesn't matter, can agree on, is that Bitcoin is secure. It's like the one thing we trust. Because if Bitcoin breaks, our entire industry goes belly up the next day. Nothing exists without Bitcoin. And that makes this design quite unique in the sense that, okay, it's very easy for a user to get confidence in that Bitcoin is secure. And if I want to deposit my assets into Bob, that is what I trust. Whether I'm coming from Polkadot, from Avalanche, from Solana, from Ethereum, my assumption is, okay, I trust Bitcoin. And that is a very big change to how, I guess, we see interoperability between different networks. Because so far today, you take Bitcoin, you'd wrap it and fragment it across all of these different networks, trust different wrapped service providers. And then between these different chains, you'd have, again, third-party providers that even have their own chains that specialize in interoperability, right? We have had Polkadot, Cosmos, Wormhole, Axelar, which are very good products, right? Because that is all we can do today. But the interesting part, and I'm very surprised that this hasn't been done before, to be fair, is why do bridges not work securely? Because ultimately, the only way to build a secure bridge is for two chains to verify each other cryptographically, right? Use cryptographic proofs to make sure that the two chains I'm interacting with are both secure. And that's just very hard. And these newer chains don't support that between each other. It just doesn't work. But Bitcoin is so easy to verify. And so we just say, look, let's use Bitcoin as a trust anchor. It's easy to verify. Everybody can connect to these Bitcoin secured systems. And again, Bitcoin dominance is growing. And look, where are you going to go if you want to trade? You're going to go to the place with the most liquidity, and that will be a Bitcoin secured system. And that's essentially the vision for the hybrid L2 design. So we can connect to multiple chains. This is the best place to access Bitcoin. You can, of course, also trade your ETH for Polkadot and withdraw it back to the underlying L1 because you're doing this under Bitcoin security umbrella. So you don't need to trust a centralized exchange. And I think that is what makes this quite unique, because it positions Bitcoin at the center of DeFi.
In terms, I mean, fascinating, and obviously the challenge here, I would imagine, is kind of like speed of transactions. How does the Bitcoin network, from a verification perspective and using the relays, is that kind of like a 30-second transaction or verification process, 1 minute, 5 minute, 10 minutes? In terms of the bridging process, is that kind of like an inefficient way of doing it, from your experience? I mean, I would imagine it takes quite a while, right? So how are you guys trading that off if it does take a while?
So as you said, there's trade-offs, right? Bitcoin takes 10 minutes to produce a block. That's just how it is. If you want to transact with Bitcoin, whether you're depositing it into Binance or into L2, it's always 10 minutes, like, or plus if you actually, or longer if you wait for multiple confirmations. So you can't get, security has a cost. So if you're using Bitcoin, you're used to there. If you're going from Bitcoin to somewhere, it's slow. Then you can use it very fast. Like Bob has 2-second block times, and it'll go much faster in the near future.
Yeah.
And then when you withdraw back to Bitcoin, it's slow. Now, of course, like if you're depositing from Ethereum to Bob, well, you don't want to wait that long. And essentially the way this works is it's actually very fast. It's like seconds, because when you're depositing from Ethereum to Bob, what essentially happens is that we just verify, okay, the lockup happened. So we know that the assets are in Bob and we can accept that. That's easy. But then when you withdraw, that's where it's slow. And then there is trade-offs, like you can wait for the finality on Bitcoin, which could take multiple Bitcoin blocks. It could be multiple hours. But again, if you look at ETH rollups today, it's actually 7 days. So, there is a lot of room for improvement, and it's the same for all these systems. And in fact, there's multiple ways to improve this with finality gadgets, where you say, okay, for smaller amounts, and that's one example. For smaller amounts, if you're using Bitcoin staking, which is something we're actually integrating for Bob, that actually gives you a good confidence much, much faster, right? Because you have these stakers that say, okay, we have a couple of $1 billion worth of Bitcoin staked. We're committing that, okay, yes, this transaction that is sending, like paying for an ice cream, we've seen that, it's good. And then you can say, well, okay, look, there's so much money behind this that is committed. If they are defrauding me, they're going to lose their Bitcoin. It's fine. I can accept this I don't have to wait for 7 days. Now, if I'm transferring a couple of $1 million, okay, then I might want to wait longer. And it's the same trade-off as we've always seen. The longer you wait, the more secure it becomes. And it's all about the market demand. Like if there's demand for faster transactions and people are willing to pay more for faster transactions, then there'll be people on the other side who accept that risk and help you facilitate these faster withdrawals. And the interesting part is this is not a problem specific to Bitcoin. Like, yes, the Bitcoin block times are slow, but there's tools available like staking, merge mining, that just give you much faster confidence about whether this is actually going to get finalized on Bitcoin or not. And you can, of course, wait, even like for to be 100% sure, you can wait longer. But that applies to all of these other bridging systems as well. So at least Bitcoin doesn't make it worse in terms of waiting times. And you can actually apply the same techniques that you see on Ethereum to just accelerate these transactions for users at the cost of, okay, like you probably wouldn't do this if you're moving $100 million, but if you're moving a few $100s, I mean, who's going to go and attack you specifically for that?
Yeah, agreed. So, yeah, thanks for that. Just from obviously from a perspective of Bob and what you guys are doing at the moment, where are you in your life cycle right now? Obviously, you guys have been building frantically, and a lot has happened. Are you guys in testnet? Are you mainnet? What's happening? Give us a bit of a broad strokes of your roadmap at the moment.
So Bob is rolling out its ground hybrid L2 vision in 3 phases. And in phase 1, we start by bootstrapping as an ETH L2, right? So we started because, again, BitVM and Bitcoin security, these things are still being developed. And in fact, they're starting to roll out in the next weeks on testnet. We've released prototypes in December 2024, and we're actually now pushing these Bitcoin security and BitVM bridges to testnet. And the rollout will happen throughout 2025. So we're expecting mainnet in like Q3, Q4 to basically start, I mean, likely Q3, but you know how these things are. So mainnet with training wheels, or like, what do you call a mainnet if the training wheels are all off or there's still training wheels there, right? So this is a gradual rollout because the user funds are at risk and you need to make sure that it's very safe. Now, what we are today is we're in ETH L2, which means that, okay, we're connected to Ethereum and we work with DeFi teams to do two things. On one hand, we build better UX for Bitcoin DeFi. We work with all the large Bitcoin wrap BTC providers and Bitcoin liquid staking token providers. And what we do is we allow users to go from Bitcoin into different DeFi products with one transaction, right? So basically, we've built an aggregator, an abstraction layer that allows you to essentially deploy your Bitcoin into lending and borrow stable coins against it by only publishing one BTC transaction instead of going to a bridge, figuring out how to wrap it, going to the lending market, comparing rates, and like it's all simplified. And we use things that are you actually familiar from Ethereum. We use intents and we use these technologies that are quite widely adopted on Ethereum. We built them for Bitcoin. And in parallel, we are working on BitVM and Bitcoin security. And that's kind of the two tracks we have in the company. So build DeFi products and build things that people can already use with the tools we have today, because realistically speaking, trust is perceived. And today, realistically speaking, WBTC and Coinbase BTC and many of the others are more secure than BitVM. Why? Because they've existed for a long time, and many institutional players and businesses prefer institutional risk over technical risk on day one because they're scared of day one exploits. And so what we do is we work with these teams to build products. And then gradually, while we develop the more secure technology, we actually talk to them because we don't want to replace them. We want to offer them better tech to make their setups more secure. So our goal is not to go and say, oh, we're replacing all the wrap BTC assets with this new BitVM asset. No, like we want to work with them to offer them better tools to improve the security for the users so they can use this on Bob. Why? Because distribution matters, integrations matter, and working with existing good established teams that are doing their best with the tools they have today, but they don't have BitVM, right? Whereas we're building it. And then in phase 2 is when these things start going live. So Bitcoin security, and we use in phase 2 Bitcoin staking. So right, we have this intermediary phase where we say, okay, we have a subset of the Bitcoin operate nodes that stake Bitcoin, and if they misbehave, they lose their BTC, which is more secure than anything else in the market. And in phase 2, to attack Bob, in our hardware design, you'll have to attack the sequencers, prevent fraud proofs or ZK proofs being published to Ethereum because we keep that connection as an ETH2. That doesn't go away. And you have to attack the majority of the Bitcoin stakers, which is more secure than any other L2 and arguably almost any other layer 1 apart from maybe Bitcoin and Ethereum. Okay. And that is what's rolling out this year. And then the final phase, phase 3, is when we would love to essentially then use fraud-proof BitVM, not only for the bridge, but actually for Bitcoin finality. So in that design, what you'd have is you'd basically use, instead of, if you, as I just mentioned, right, we still have in phase 2, the ZK proofs on Ethereum. So we ZK roll up to Ethereum users, and like ETH users trust the ZK proofs, and it's very secure for them. They don't care as much about Bitcoin security. They only care about Bitcoin security when they use Bitcoin on Bob. For the Bitcoin holders, they care about Bitcoin security because that's what's securing the Bitcoin bridge. So it's kind of this hybrid design where you have both of these security systems. And in our final stage, we'd like to move the fraud proof or ZK proofs to Bitcoin. Because as I said, like I think, to really scale this to multiple networks, you have to have that part where people really have this full Bitcoin security. Interestingly, the difference is not huge, right? Whether you have billions of dollars of Bitcoin staked or every Bitcoin full node cryptographically, in practice, that different problem that won't matter until you reach a certain size. When you have billions of dollars in TVL on chain, that's when it becomes relevant. And that's also when you'll be able to afford it, because the only blocker for phase 3 is cost. For phase 3, where we have a slower finality fully on Bitcoin, and then you still have staking for faster transactions and faster kind of processing, and for specifically also for these multi-chain connections. But the Bitcoin part, you have to continuously execute proofs or post data to Bitcoin, which is expensive. It is very, very expensive. And it only works if you have sufficient scale where you can spread the costs among many, many, many users so that it's maybe a cent more expensive per user. And I know there's L2 projects that say, no, we're going directly to that. We're going to post all the data and it's going to be fine. And I just don't think that users will care enough that you have more Bitcoin security if you're paying 100x or 1000x the fees. I just don't believe that, right? People will go to Solana. That's why they go to L2s on Ethereum, because there's a trade-off between cost and security, and people are fine with L2s on Ethereum. And these are even less secure than Bitcoin secure networks. And essentially that's what we're doing with Bob. So we're actually entering a very interesting and exciting phase where we're rolling out Bitcoin security and BitVM throughout this year. And we already have quite the demand on our end. So we have 240 million in on-chain deposits. We have over 100 teams live or building on Bob. And this is just accelerating. We've seen 350,000 or 380,000, I think, unique on-chain users since inception. And that was like since May 2024. So you can see like it's really accelerating and people want to use Bitcoin. And it really helps us also engage with projects and users and institutions to understand, okay, how do we actually make sure that these Bitcoin security and these Bitcoin secure bridges meet their requirements, because they need to be easy to use. And I think that's what Lightning Network, for example, never did. They built the system and said, here you go, use it. We're trying to work with our clients, with the people who will be using it, to explain the trade-offs and understand, okay, do you want maximum security or do you want a slight trade-off, but then it's like much easier to use? And most people prefer that.
Yeah, a very mindful approach in terms of obviously understanding the tools, understanding the markets, understanding that you need those teams and those devs. And then I think if you get that right, then the rest essentially will fall into place from that point onwards. I think, yeah, I mean, we're at the top of the hour. Could easily carry on for another hour, maybe even two. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. I mean, this is essentially in many ways a new paradigm off the back of old school paradigms. And I mean, I love the fact that we have, you know, Bitcoin moving forward, Bitcoin DeFi as a DeFi maxi myself. I think it's where we need to go. There's no doubt about it. I think the challenges are, you know, bridging those divides, excuse the pun, but it seems like you guys have got a very articulated and very well thought out plan. Clearly the academic side of who you guys are is coming through. And the only thing that I can say is good luck. It sounds like you guys have got an amazing plan, and really look forward to seeing how it essentially rolls out and how it grows and how the ideas grow, because I'm sure you guys obviously have new things to think about every day from an academic and a practical perspective. And yeah, just in closing, thanks, Alexi, for your time. It's been one of the more stimulating conversations that I've had in recent times. Just, yeah, a lot to think about. Obviously, a lot of moving parts, and it's really cool to see how you guys obviously taking them into consideration. So, yeah, well done. And yeah, we'll be keeping a close eye on what you guys are doing. No pressure.
Cool. Thanks for having me. And yeah, hopefully we'll speak again soon, and then all of this will be live, and we've proven that it can actually be done.
Cool, man. Look forward to it. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining us. It's been great to have you, and please like, subscribe, share with your friends and to other DeFi maxis. Yeah, we're moving in the right direction. Here's to Bitcoin DeFi and what's in store for us. Take it easy. All the best.
Quick one, nothing here is financial advice. It's for entertainment and educational purposes only. Always do your own research or speak to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Like and subscribe.